Shalom, everybody. This was the broadcast that almost wasn't, but we made it. Thank God. So, welcome, and we're glad that you could join us, hopefully on YouTube and hopefully on Facebook, if you're watching in one of those venues. So, we're in John chapter 18. I think we stopped at verse 28. God, thank you for your word, the richness of it, and we bless you, Lord God, for where you're going to take us in this. To illuminate us and to make it a practical reality for our very daily walks with you, with one another. Thank you in Yeshua's name. All right. So, verse 28, then the Judeans, and I don't think I have to explain that anymore, but the Judeans led Yeshua from Caiaphas. No, wait a minute. That's not right. That's not where we are, is it? No.
To Annas, right?
Yeah. We're okay. It's chapter 18 and verse 12. I'm sorry. That's right. This is the only way I know. Folded page. Okay. So the Roman cohort, the Roman commander, Kiliarchos, was standardly in charge of 1,000 men of different, not necessarily all fighting men, but 1,000 people, and very high in the Roman strata. So the Roman cohort and the commander and the officers of the Judeans arrested Yeshua and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. Now, Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Judeans that it was expedient for one to die on behalf of the people. Remember, he said that, we read it, and it's ironic, right? His view was, if one man dies, there will be no suspicion of insurrection, and so the Romans will not barge in. That's one of the two things they can't stand. Anybody who purports themselves as king against the emperor, and second of all, any rowdiness that precludes the taxes and the monies from coming in. So those two things can't happen. So the country will be spared if one man dies. Of course, we read it ironically. That's right. That's true. That one man, the Messiah, dies for the atonement. As God becoming man for the atonement of the nation and of the world. It's the same irony as when the people said, "Let His blood be upon us." Right? On the one hand, they think they're taking the onus for what's happening there, but in another way, yes, it's prophetic. His blood will be upon the Jewish people to redeem them. So here's this guy. With all his troops and his officers, and also the priesthood. And here the Caiaphas is 18 to 36, and Annas was just prior to that in 6 to 15. So what happens is the Romans appoint these guys, and usually it's because of money or something with money. To Rome. And so basically the high priest buys, at this time they buy the priesthood. And so Annas retires, but he's like the mastermind. He's the guy in back of the guy. Okay, he's like the father, grandfather figure, the advisor. And Caiaphas is the official high priest. So at any given time, you can have a number of high priests, but only one functioning. And then a strata of high priests that would function as advisors or counselors or whatever their job happened to be. All right. So Annas is the elder statesman in this thing. All right. He's the power, in a sense, behind the throne. Now, we've already talked about the Kidron Valley and did you think any more about that? The brook?
In reading, I came across it more frequently than, I probably at least twice in just reading. But no other special revelation or anything, but it was just kind of interesting that that's come up several times. I probably wouldn't even have thought about it.
Okay. So let me just read this. It's something that happens on the first fruits, and it's called the ceremony of the sheaf of the first fruits.
The first
And-
what?
Of the first fruits.
Fruits.
Okay. And first fruits, you have first fruits in the spring, with Shavuot. You have the first fruits in
Yeah.
Passover before that, and then prior to that, I guess later in the year is first fruits of Sukkot. Okay. So this is kind of the Passover first fruits, right? Which occurs either, depending on whether you're a Sadducee or a Pharisee, either the first Saturday after Passover starts, or the first day after Passover starts. Different schools of thought. But this is what they did. The messengers of the Sanhedrin went out from Jerusalem on the evening of the first day, the 16th of Nisan, and over the brook Kidron to the adjacent fields. Now, we've already done that, right? And bound the standing corn in bundles, that it might be easier reaped. And all the neighboring cities gathered together there, that it might be reaped in great pump. And when it was dark, one of the reapers would say to them, "Is the sun set?" It's this whole antiphonal litany, which is quite interesting. Oh, we have some folks. This is a pause for station identification.
Sorry, we gave it the office.
Okay.
Hey. Yeah, well, they're not meeting here today, so we decided to get comfy. Yeah, just you can move my stuff over there and come over here. Okay. Hey, hi. So we're talking about now Yeshua being bound and bound. That's an important issue, and brought to Annas, the high priest, who really wasn't the high priest that year, but he had retired. But he was the power behind the high priest, who was
High
Caiaphas.
priest emeritus.
Emeritus. I didn't think of that. Right. Okay.
What about, the Pope? In the Catholic Church, we had a retired Pope.
Yeah.
First time in probably, I don't know, hundreds of years.
A long time, yeah.
What did they call him? Was he still called the Pope, or was he Pope Emeritus? Does anybody remember that? I'm just trying to remember.
The only
what that
thing
was.
I know is that on a holiday they would say "Get Yontif Pontiff."
They'd say what?
Get Yontif Pontiff.
Get you to front.
No, I really don't know.
Yeah,
don't know
it just occurred to me like
Yeah.
that did happen. It's been rare, but it did.
Yeah, I think they.
I think he's given up all his titles, I don't know.
Sounds, well,
He's just,
maybe one of you Catholic people could write us.
Yeah, right to us.
All
What's
right,
that address?
so we've already, Yeshua has already gone through the Kidron Valley, but now here is
okay,
this.
they're crossing the Kidron Brook, which is the valley. So now they're growing corn on the Mount of Olives, on that
Yeah,
side of the valley.
And many hills.
Yeah, but
Okay. But now
that side.
we're only dealing with the bound corn. Okay, that's
Already
they're
got-
reaping, but the first fruits. It's called the binding of the first fruits. It's a ceremony, and I want to relate it to what's happening here with Yeshua. Okay, so the 16th Nisan and over the brook Kidron to the adjacent fields, and bound the standing corn in bundles, that it might be easier reaped. And all the neighboring cities gathered together there, that it might be reaped in great pump. And when it was dark, one of the reapers says to them, and here's this antiphonal questioning back and forth.
About 12 or 15,
Is-
18, 12, 15.
Is the sun set? They say yes. And again, is the sun set? They say yes. With this sickle shall I reap? They say yes. Again, with this sickle shall I reap? They say it's kind of a song, an antiphonal song. In this basket shall I put it? They say yes. Again, in this basket shall I put it? They say yes. If on the Sabbath day he says to them, is this the Sabbath day? They say yes. Again, is this the Sabbath day? They say yes. It was the Sabbath day this year. Shall I reap? they shall say to him, reap. Shall I reap? They shall say to him, reap. 3 times upon everything. And they shall reap it and put it into baskets and bring it to the court where they dry it by the fire. Now, I just want to bring your attention to the fact that while they're moving to the court of the high priest, the first fruit bundle is bound and it's brought to the court of the high priest for the blessing. And on their way, there's this antiphonal question, right? The answers are obvious, okay? But let's see if we can justly relate this to Yeshua, who has already come through the Kidron Valley with his disciples doing what? Questioning, back and forth. What's going on? What's going to happen? And then here's Yeshua, the first fruits, being bound, and on the way to the high priest, you've got to have some questions going back and forth. What do you think's going to happen? What does the high priest want with him? Why Annas and not Caiaphas? And why don't we just bring him right to the Romans? This question back and forth. And but they are of one accord. They know what the answers are. Okay, this one will be bound over for death. Right. So Yeshua, the bound first fruits, is going just like the first fruits of the festival, going to the court of the high priest. Right, through the same black waters of the Kidron Valley, the same questioning back and forth. The imagery is unmistakable, right? If you don't know that happening, which fortunately for us is recorded in rabbinic writings, then you miss out on the entire imagery, right? If I were to make a movie, I think I would, in the background, I'd have that ceremony while this other thing is happening, so people could connect the symbolism. It's terribly dramatic. Does that does it resonate at all?
Yeah. It does.
So Simon Peter and another disciple were following Yeshua because this disciple was known to the high priest. He went with Yeshua into the high priest's courtyard. Now that's odd because not everybody gets in there. Okay, so that's an odd situation already. How does this other guy and Peter get in to the courtyard? But Peter had to wait outside the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back and spoke to the girl on duty there and brought Peter in. So basically, we've seen this before. We've seen this in Acts, where a girl is attending the door, a maid attending the door when Peter comes, and she reports, and nobody believes it. Finally she lets him in. So Peter has to wait at the door until what? The one who is known to the high priest goes in, gets permission, comes back to the girl, and then she can let him in. And Peter can come in. Right? So he spoke to the girl on duty there and brought Peter in. So who was the other disciple?
John.
Huh?
I think it was John.
It had to be John.
And
And what's
Failed to mention the one that Jesus loved.
yeah, of course. I mean, he never mentions his own name.
No.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Who was you know it all? Who was John? I'm sorry, I'm blocking the viewer. Who is John's? John, the disciples. Who was his mother? Do you know her name?
Mrs. John.
Mrs. John. No, his mother.
Oh.
Salome. Not the Salome, Herod Salome, but there's a different Salome. Okay, her name was Salome, and who is she? She's the sister of Miriam, of Mary. Okay,
Which means that
but
John
they are
and Jesus
related
cousins.
Your cousin?
They're cousins, first cousins.
and related to Elizabeth. And excuse me, Elizabeth, whose husband is Zechariah, right?
Tante Lizzie, yeah.
And Zechariah was a priest. We don't know if he was a high priest. I doubt it. But he was a priest. So John is related distantly in some way to the priesthood, and clearly they knew him. So John gets in where none of the other disciples probably could have gotten in. And he gets Peter in. So here's a guy known to the high priest, must have been of good reputation, right? They let him in the courtyard, no problem whatsoever. And he gets Peter in. All right. So John is known, related in some way to the priesthood. And now they're in the courtyard, right? And what is the girl? The girl sees Peter. You are not one of the disciples, are you? The girl at the door asked Peter. And he replied, I am not. Now, where was Peter? Luke tells us, we look at Luke, Luke tells us that his face was towards the fire. So when your face is towards the fire, what happens? Your face is,
You get warm.
well, you get warm, huh?
Yeah, but it starts to glow. You have the light on.
Oh, you're visible. You're revealed.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, he's when your face is towards the light, you are recognized as Yeshua's disciple. And when not, you're not.
Okay.
So here, that's a little preaching. It's not in the text.
Yeah.
That's a little soapbox.
You just couldn't resist.
I couldn't. Yeah, I just had to say it. It's not in the text, but it's a very good teaching, right?
Okay.
It's just not in the Bible. That's all. But anyhow, here he is, and she asks him. She recognizes him, and his face is now illuminated. All he wants to do is get warm. But in doing that, he exposes himself. And the young maid asks him the question, aren't you one of his disciples? The Greek implies that he's going to say yes. So it was cold, and the servants and the officials stood around the fire they had made to keep warm. Peter also was standing with them, warming himself. All right. So Jerusalem's about 2,600 feet above sea level. That's not much by our standards, but it's enough to be chilly. Even in the springtime, it's going to be chilly. Jerusalem in the wintertime gets snow sometimes, and so it's quite different than a lot of the southern regions of Israel. But meanwhile, the high priest questions Yeshua about, now notice, about his disciples and his teaching. Okay? They're not asking him who he is. They're asking about his disciples, and his teaching. And so we have to ask a question. What is the point of asking about his disciples, right? And his teaching, right? How many disciples do you have, and what are you teaching them? Like, is this going to be an insurrection that's going to bring the Romans down upon us? Are you inciting people to rebel against Rome? Not much less us, but Rome. Are you going to cause trouble to bring the Romans in, right? Because festivals, especially Passover is the festival of what? Deliverance from Egypt. So nationalism would run very, very high at Passover and the other pilgrim feasts. When you think of Jerusalem, the greater Jerusalem area, according, I think, to the best estimates, there were maybe 50,000 Jewish people living in the greater Jerusalem area. But on festivals, that number swelled to over 1 million.
You're talking about then.
Then. Over 1 million people. So it was a time where if you wanted to stir the crowd, that would be the time. And that was the time, and later on, when we get to Pilate, we're going to see the paranoia and the worry about that. That was the time that everybody would be on guard. Okay? The elders and the priesthood would be on guard. The Romans would be on guard. They would work together to make sure there were no uprisings. This would be the time the greatest time that the zealots could get together and stir up the people to do their assassinations, and cause furor and whatnot. So he's asking about what his disciples, like how many are there? What's the makeup? What's their disposition? And what are you teaching them? What's the doctrine? What is it that you're trying to do? Well, they knew very well, okay, but they're hoping that he will say something like, "We will eventually take over. The kingdom of God will take over," right? And then they got him. That's all he's got to say. Okay, they wanted to say that he is a king and that he's going to take over. His disciples are going to take over. They got him. That's it. That's all that has to happen. That's all Pilate has to hear, and it's instant death.
Right.
There's no negotiation. There's no nothing. All right.
Except Jesus speaks in riddles.
Well, he's very clever. I have spoken to you, verse 20. I have spoken to you openly to the world. Yeshua replied, I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple, where all the Judeans come together. I said nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I have said. He knew what the ploy was, and they knew what he taught. They knew what he did. They were afraid of what he did. He was a miracle worker that had captured the imagination of the people. So yes, they want him to confess. The people are with me, and my kingdom is such that I can call on the angels of heaven, and I can take over this just like that. That's all they want. In Isaiah chapter 50, which is one of the servant psalms, verse 8, there's an interesting portion here. He who vindicates me is near. Who then will bring charges against me? Let us face each other. Who is my accuser? Let him confront me. In other words, the servant was predicted to have this situation where he would be confronted by accusers, but not confronted directly, but confronted in this sneaky, seditious fashion to lure the servant of the Lord into what? Into death, into despair, into disrepute. When Yeshua heard this, verse 22, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Yeshua replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me? Then Annas sent him, still bound, here's the bound first fruits, to Caiaphas, the high priest. He's not going to get what he wants. Okay? So the act, by the way, according to rabbinic law of the day, was illegal. In fact, Yeshua was not labeled as an offender. He was not. He wasn't charged yet. Okay, so according to Jewish law, if an official slaps or abuses a prisoner that's not charged, that official is subject to a fine of 200, was then called zuzim. Whatever the smallest denomination was. Okay, so of course nothing like that happened. They weren't fined. They weren't punished. Nothing was said. Right. So probably Annas and Caiaphas lived in the same place. So there wasn't a whole lot of time between Annas and Caiaphas. Why do you smite me? All right, we said that. 1825. You see how now the scene switches back. Okay, it's beautifully orchestrated. As Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." Okay, so somebody else now, right? Matthew and Mark say it was a girl. Was it the same girl? It could have been. Same girl at the door. And you notice how Big Peter, who cuts off the serpent's ear, is intimidated by this young maid. This young girl. And she's going to expose him, right? Aren't you the one? I am not. Okay. The way she asks, she's probably not sure, and he gives a negative answer. But then third time, verse 26, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. So clearly, this fulfills what Yeshua said before. The rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. All right. Yeah.
This is really strange to me that Peter did this in light of the fact that if it was John, John would have been known as one of Yeshua's disciples. So the fact that he was also known to be associated with Yeshua, he got Peter in. So wouldn't they, I mean, you would have to think, what was Peter's defense mechanism, the thought process he was going through, because he got in based on somebody who was a known disciple of Yeshua, one of the...
But we're not told that Peter wanted to go in. We're not told that.
Get in there, buddy. You're coming in with it.
I'm saying he was with John. John wanted to go in. John, in this case, was the brave one. Okay, we don't know who John talked to, but he talked to somebody who gave permission to let Peter in. But we're not told at all that Peter wanted to be there. Okay? So maybe out of shame, we don't know what the motive, but he's trying to hide.
Yeah, he was afraid.
Okay,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah, he was-
I can understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
John at least had the favor of the high priest. Clearly, John comes in there unafraid. Okay, he's got favor with the high priest. He's not worried. If there's trouble, they're not going to do anything to me. Okay, I'm related to people.
Right.
Okay,
Now that makes
Got
sense.
clout.
okay,
I got influence.
Right.
I've got influence, right? So Peter denies, and Peter.
But he had to deny it because it was prophesied.
Yes, but it
Yeah,
shows that
I
he
thought
already
about
had
that too.
fear.
Yeah, he was already
Okay,
afraid.
he already had fear, and I think any normal person would, unless you're a guy like John that understands from the beginning. John's a remarkable character in Scripture. One of the most, I would think, for me, remarkable characters that he could understand from the get-go, the divine Messiah, and accentuate that, in his what I call the gospel. And he went through it. He seemed to understand what needed to take place and really was curious to see how it would all unfold.
I wonder how much of that was explained by John, the immerser, because he was one of his disciples.
Good point.
That it helped him to understand, because he was prophesying about a Messiah that he was before John even met the Messiah. He said, "I'm the one that's sent."
So if you didn't catch this, John was John the Immerser's disciple, and then Dan is asking how much of this could have already been explained to John. I think that's a really good point. I think a lot, because he sees it, and he's lying on Yeshua's chest as if he wants to absorb everything. He wants to hear every word. He wants to understand it in light of what he's already known, right? And he writes beautifully. His text is beautiful. So immediately the cock crowed. It's early morning. It's probably around 3 o'clock in the morning, something on that order. If you're a farmer, you probably know better than me. But I'd say about 3 o'clock, something like that. So now the account before Yeshua, it's a little different. It's a little different than some of the other Gospels. The other Gospels really center in on legal issues, but John centers in on the attitudes of people. Pilate's attitude, for example, and like he did with the Samaritan woman, he looks at the attitude of the Samaritan woman, or the blind man in chapter 9. What was the disposition, rather than the legalities of things, which everybody already knew? He really delves into who they all are, what they're thinking. Will they change their minds? Have they already made up their minds? Verse 28. Then the Judeans led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Did I skip anything?
That's right.
Okay.
Annas sent him to Caiaphas, and then Caiaphas just doesn't want to do it and said straight.
Well, we don't know what that conversation was, but it's had to have been some report given to Caiaphas, look, he's not buying this. He's not going to admit anything, but he's got to go through you in order to have credibility, in order for you to have, us to have credibility with Pilate. So he goes to the palace of the Roman governor. It's probably early morning now. And to avoid contamination, ceremonial uncleanness, the Judeans did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Chagiga, the Passover. So Passover has already occurred. It's probably 8 o'clock in the morning.
How, excuse me, how would just walking into the building make them unclean?
Because it's a Gentile building. It wasn't ceremonially clean. So here,
Yep, all right.
so here's the deal. Let me read from rabbinic writings. Yeah. Okay. So every sacrifice after the Passover sacrifice, every sacrifice on Passover is called the Chagiga, from Chag, festival sacrifice. Okay. And so if what was meant was the Passover meal with the Passover lamb, Deuteronomy, Leviticus 22 makes it clear you wash, and in the evening you could partake of the lamb. But these guys wanted to eat the Passover, the Chagiga, which for that day, the Chagiga, the first Chagiga of the festival would be at 3 o'clock. Okay? And in fact, if they got polluted, right? If they had gotten into the court and were polluted, for 7 days they would be unclean.
They missed the entire-
So that means, huh?
They missed the whole festival.
They'd miss the whole
Yeah,
thing.
they missed
Okay.
everything.
They'd be polluted. They couldn't. They couldn't possibly officiate for anything. And plus, it was a sign of disfavor from God. So they made a point. That's why it's very clear. The night before was a Passover Seder. I mean, it's not an arguable situation. From Jewish law, Passover had already started, which meant they couldn't just wash and be clean in the evening, right? Because at 3 o'clock, they'd still be unclean, right? But if it was a Passover Seder, Passover Seder wasn't until the evening. So they could have washed and been ready for that. So Passover had already started Thursday night, the Passover Seder, Friday afternoon at 3 p.m. That's the Chagiga, right? So it's pretty clear. In fact, that's what we have, all right? I don't know that I have to do all of that. All right. Yeah.
What was it about entering into the praetorium that would have made them defiled?
It's not it wasn't ceremonially clean. It'd be like going to a sepulcher and becoming defiled,
Okay.
or a graveyard,
So
or
they had to kind of stay out in the open
Yeah.
and not go into any building.
they had to
or
be
anything
very
like that.
careful. Yeah, very careful
Okay.
as to what they touched, what they did. Even in those days, you had 3 levels of impurity: first level, second level, third level. First level, you could impart a first level of impurity to somebody, like if you touched a dead body. Second level, you could impart a third level, but not a second. They had all kinds of rules and regulations. But in this case, it was not removable for 7 days. Okay, that was their particular law, and there was precedent in like Deuteronomy 21 and other places. 7 days they'd be ceremonially unclean.
And so the members of the Judean council then
Yeah.
were either Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, or Zealots.
It could have also been elders,
So are
wealthy
those-
people.
So they're all considered sons of Aaron. They're all
No.
priestly, or they would be Levites.
No, by this
They're
time,
not even that.
what happened was in the time of Ezra, the priests are ruling everything. I mean, the king is like a figurehead, Okay, so Ezra and Nehemiah come into the picture, and the Persian king said, "Go ahead and have a country. I'll give you the money." We see this in Nehemiah 2, is when they actually we see Nebuchadnezzar, we see others, Cyrus, for example, raised up and allowing them to go back to the land. But it isn't until Artaxerxes in 446 that they actually went. So when they go into the land, we read the stories, and it's clear the priesthood is ruling everything, because the Persians said, "We don't care if you have a king, but he can't rule. He's got to be relegated to taking care of roads, partitioning out lands, more like a governor, a minor governor. But the real people in charge have got to be the priests. We don't want any king raising an army against us anymore." So they said, "Go ahead and build your temple, and when you come out of your temple, you're going to tell the people God is ruling through us, and we say we're going to pay tribute to the Persians." Okay, so the Persians were very clever. They weren't like the Babylonians that took everybody away and put them in their own land. They sent them back, and they made a fortune because these people prospered in their lands, and they sent the monies back, that they owed the taxes. Okay, so Pilate. Now we're talking about Pilate. Are we in verse 31? I lose sight.
Where they were leading, we were talking about the
28.
Praetorian,
28.
so I think it's where you left
29.
off about
28,
not being
So
fired.
so Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charge?" This is a typical politician. "What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would have not handed him over to you." Now, it just so happens that the meeting place of the Sanhedrin. Maybe I didn't explain the Sanhedrin. The priests ruled everything, and there were various ones. Aristobulus the first was one of them. John Hyrcanus was another one. These were people who said, "I'm going to be both the priest and the king." Okay, and it's caused civil war. So there was a lot of upheavals, a lot of kind of civil distress. But Alexander Janus was the king, and he was he was dying, and his wife was the sister of the head of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were out of favor, and were not in the Sanhedrin, the ruling class. So he said, "Look, let's make a deal with her brother. I'll let the Pharisees in as co-rulers, okay? And the co-rulers are going to be made up of Essenes, all of the factions, okay? So we can work together. Only don't assassinate my family. Keep my family alive, okay?" So they did that. That was really the beginning of the Sanhedrin. But from the 6th century to the 1st century, the adjudicators. Now later, in the 1st century, when the Sanhedrin was formed, the Sanhedrin were the adjudicators, and 70 guys made up the rulership of all of Israel, with the high priest actually in charge. So what happened is, they built a chamber on the north wall of the temple. The temple was an interesting place. The temple had places for people to sleep, for the adjudicators to sleep if they needed to stay overnight. It had prophetic chambers built into the wall. It was a very, very interesting place. And so the prophets and working priests and whatnot, they could come to Jerusalem, have a place to stay, because obviously they didn't have dwellings of their own in Jerusalem necessarily. They came from afar off, Naphtali or someplace like that. So anyhow, on the north side of the wall was this beautiful chamber. And nobody knows who, somebody came up with the idea that in the scripture, in Deuteronomy, the scripture says that the altar cannot be made of cut stone, right? It's got to be made of whole stone, and you can't chop it up, So they made this chamber for adjudicating capital cases, and it was called the Hall of Hewn Stones, and it was layered with marble. It was a beautiful edifice, a spectacular thing, and that's where they adjudicated the capital offenses. Well, Rome came in, as you know, in 63 BCE, and kind of, they saw what was going on. We can make a lot of money in this place because Israel is the Via Mara for, the main pathway from Europe to Africa, and from Africa to Asia, and Europe to Africa, Europe to Asia and back. And these roads are very valuable, and the ports are amazing, So the land, we don't care about the land, really. And we certainly don't care about the people, but we want the land. We want to, tax the people. We want the produce to run forward. We can make a lot of money, which they did. So they came in, and they felt like if they took the power away from the Sanhedrin to adjudicate capital offenses, that this would cut off the legs of the judicial and the lawmakers' bodies, because that was an important issue. If you can't adjudicate laws of a capital nature, you're not really running the country. Okay. The Talmud makes a case for a different system that never existed until later. So we can't really go by that. We have to go by Josephus. We have to go by Tacitus. We have to go by the New Covenant. And so clearly I think it was 1 CE, Aristobulus, another Aristobulus, a weaker king, under him, it is said in rabbinic literature that the Sanhedrin no longer met in the Hall of Hewn Stones. It means that the power to adjudicate capital offenses was taken away. So they're going to tell Pilate, we have to bring them to you because we can't kill anyone. Okay? Going to put the blame on Rome. Okay? It's a very nice, neat little thing. The people aren't going to rebel against them.
Convenient.
Very convenient. People not going to rebel. We didn't do it.
Throw the rock, hide
We-
your hand.
Huh?
Throw the rock, hide your hand.
Okay, and nobody's gonna,
Yeah.
nobody's gonna get them. So the Hall of Hewn Stones no longer. So the scepter had departed from Judah, basically, under these conditions. So Pilate said in the verse 31, "Take him for yourselves and judge him by your own law." Like, what have I got to do with this? You got problems religiously with this guy, but we have no right to execute anyone. The Jews objected. I've already explained that. And it was true, right? Not that they didn't. Okay? They had no right under this Roman rule, but it's not that they didn't. You remember Stephen? Okay? So they did it. But so this has to be an excuse. Okay? This has to be an excuse.
Stephen was before this.
After.
After. Okay.
But they don't want the blame.
Right.
Okay? It's clear. This is all concocted. They didn't kill people if they would. They were ready to stone the adulterous woman,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They were ready to kill her right there on the spot, not even according to Roman law. All right. So anyhow, the Judeans objected to this, but Pilate understands. He's not a dumbbell. He's a pretty sharp guy. All right. Yeah. This happened that the words of Yeshua spoken, indicating the kind of death that he was going to die, would be fulfilled. In other words, not stoning, but what? Death on a tree. Cursed is anyone that hangs on a tree. What is the meaning? In those days, you couldn't leave the body hanging on the tree too long because it was said it would desecrate the land. So it was real important that before a Sabbath or before an important event, get the body off of there because the land will be desecrated. The land will become impure and it won't yield. It will be cursed, right? So all this stuff, some of which is just superstition, concocted, blended in with law, but that's what they felt, right? So Yeshua already had predicted this, Now, Pilate, I want you to know, was already in trouble with the emperor. Okay? He had been a bad boy. He had minted his own coins. The governors before him were very careful to mint coins with Jewish symbols: palm leaves, fig leaves, things like that, pomegranates, right? They were very careful not to incite the people because Rome didn't like that. The governor's job was to keep order. But Pilate minted coins with pagan symbols on them, symbols of the emperor, symbols of Roman standards, and the people didn't like it. So that was one notch against him. The second thing is he put busts of the emperor all around the fortress there at Caesarea. Silver standards all around. That caused uproars. That caused emperor didn't like it. He had to take them down. Then he put gilded shields, silver shields up, right, with Roman standards attached to them. The people didn't like it. Pilate was flaunting this. He had total disdain for the Jewish people. Horrible disdain, right? He was inflexible, Josephus said. He was stubborn, Philo says. He executed prisoners without trials. He was a mean guy, okay? A terribly mean guy. And then he did something really bad. You know what the Korban money is. Korban, if you give Korban, it's not just like it's a gift dedicated to the temple for the temple treasury's use, to better the temple, basically, and to better it's not so much used for the roads as for the temple area. So it's something holy. It can't be given back, and people used it in various ways. But so what does Pilate do? Pilate takes those monies to improve an aqueduct, and it caused the Jewish rebellion. Many Jews died, and Pilate got punished. The emperor wanted to kill him. So Pilate is on this thin thread. Think about what's happening with Pilate. Pilate could care less. He just said, "Go ahead and kill him, put him up there." But Pilate is doing the opposite of what the Jewish leaders is doing. He's going to put it back on their heads. Okay, you're going to notice it in just a little while here. All right, Pilate. He says he summons Yeshua, and he asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" It's really like this. It's more like this. "So you are the king of the Jews, are you?" It's sarcastic.
Right.
Okay, like this is you, king of the Jews. It's like a joke. Okay, to him. He says, Yeshua said, "Is that your own idea?" Yeshua said, "Or did others talk to you about me?" All right. In other words, they want to blame you. Right? They say that I am a threat to the emperor. Is that your idea, or did they tell you that? He says in verse 35, "Am I a Judean? A Jew?" Pilate replied, "It was your people and your chief priests." By the way, all of this is going to be recorded. In the Jewish way of doing things, that's all going down on paper.
Okay.
If he ever has to prove, right, it wasn't him, he didn't do a bad thing to incite the people.
Oh,
You see, he's already in trouble.
right.
Okay, it's all being written down. And mind you, it was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it that you've done? Pilate already knows. It's been 3.5 years. He knows what's going on. He's not threatened by Yeshua. He sees him as a man. He's got legions. He can put him down anytime he wants. Let him start trouble amongst the leadership. They'll serve him right. I just test them anyway. Right? Okay? So this is Pilate putting it back on them. Yeshua said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight, to present my arrest by the Judeans, but now my kingdom is from another place. Okay. If my kingdom was of this world, you see a different result. You know that I'm not inciting anybody to do what? To riot. But there, Pilate has what he needs. Okay? You are a king then. If you have a kingdom, you must be a king.
Right.
So you're claiming to be a king. I don't care where you think your kingdom is. You're a threat to the emperor. That's all being written down. Okay? If he ever has to prove it to the emperor, look, I did everything by the book. You know, these Jews came to me. I put it back on them. I pushed away any blame on Rome. They can't blame Rome, right? I did my job. Plus, he just out and out says he's a king. We don't care where his kingdom is, but he is a problem now to the emperor by his own words. Yeshua answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Here's this word again. You say that I am a king, ego eimi. I am. He said this before, ego eimi. I am. It's reflective of the I am back in the Torah. I am that I am. I am sent you. Okay? So what is truth? That's what he's asking this question. Well, truth for Pilate is what? Is what is expedient and what is necessary, what's convenient for him. Okay? This question was bantered about in the first century. What is truth? Truth is God. Truth is the Torah. Truth is everything that proceeds from God and from his heart and from his mouth, right? But for this reason, I was born, right? I'm fully aware and have been fully aware of my origin and of my destiny. Right? What is truth? Pilate asked. With this, he went out. Didn't stay for Yeshua's answer. Do you notice that?
Turned his back on the truth.
Turned his back on him. Didn't care. Wasn't interested in the polemic and a little tay-to-tay and a little debate. Wasn't interested. What is truth? You got a truth. I got a truth. My truth does what's good for me. Okay? Your truth, we don't even know. Probably Pilate didn't believe in anything. He knew that the gods were a myth. Right? He believed that probably the God of Israel was a myth. Right? Pure secularism. He must have been a very good leader and very smart because Rome let him lead for another 10 years, which is a long time for somebody. Right? But he turns his back.
Well, they didn't want him back in Rome.
Well, that's probably true too. But we really don't know exactly what happened to Pilate. There's a lot of stories about him. So Pilate, what is truth? With this, he went out. That means abruptly, again to the Judeans and said, "I find no basis for a charge against them." Right? In other words, Rome's not going to take the hit for this. I've written down what's going to get me off the hook with Rome, that he said he's a king, but I'm not telling you that. You notice? I'm not telling you that. But this is your custom, for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews? He's degrading them and their faith and their history and their religion. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews to you? Is he your king? Now, you know the story of Barabbas, but what you might not know is Barabbas' full name. Okay? And so we see that in some other places. Barabbas' name was Yeshua bar Abba. Yeshua bar Abba.
So Yeshua, son of the Father.
Do you want me to? Who do you want me to release? And they say, Yeshua bar Abba. So, The part of the crowd that wants Yeshua released, Yeshua bar Abba. The part that wants Barabbas released, Yeshua bar Abba. Who makes the choice which Yeshua bar Abba is going to be released? Pilate. It's a no-win scenario. Yeshua bar Abba. The whole crowd couldn't have been
Both had the same names, effectively.
effectively the same name. So it doesn't matter which one you want released. Yeshua bar Abba for some is going to be Yeshua of Nazareth. And for others, it's going to be Barabbas, who was a zealot general, a very capable general, who's going to be killed. So, no, they shouted back, no, not him, not the king of the Jews. Okay, not the one you call the king of the Jews. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in the rebellion, right? And so he was put down, and his army is defeated. He was an outlaw. He was an insurrectionist. And
let's just say he was a robber.
well, revolutionary is more the, yeah. So Matthew 27, a lot of ancient manuscripts of Matthew 27 has Yeshua Barabbas, Aramaic translations. So we know his name was Yeshua Barabbas. So they're both named the same name. So it's a no-win scenario. And now we're going to move on. What does Pilate do in 19:1? He pleases the Judeans and besmirches them at the same time. Then Pilate took Yeshua and had him flogged. Right? This is the truth of appeasement. To placate the leadership, he had him flogged. Right? And to flog the King of the Jews. This is what we do to the King of the Jews. You want a King of the Jews? It doesn't matter whether you think it's him, whoever you think, that's what we're going to do to him. We're going to flog the King of the Jews. I think I'm going to stop there. I want you to take a look. We have 3 minutes. I want you to take a look at what Pilate wrote and what the objection was, and tell me a little bit about that, and what the soldiers did, the whole thing, right? What did Pilate do? How did he label Yeshua on the cross? And what was the objection? And I think it's going to be obvious to you.
Right.
But,
Make a mockery. Mockery.
you have to give away the answer to
Oh,
that?
I'm sorry.
But yeah. But basically, that's what's going to happen, right? So Pilate is a no-good-nick. He doesn't care for the Jewish people. He would like to be somewhere else, but that's the job he can get. Okay. Question or comment?
So they had Yiddish English back then too. He's a no good.
He's a no-good. All right. Thank you for joining us. And as always, if you have comments or questions, forward them to our email, bmstidewater@hotmail.com, and we will get back to you as we can, as soon as possible. We also invite you to join us for Saturday at 9:30 for our Torah study. Our service is 10:30. And then soon, I believe, either this coming week or in January, our Hebrew class, beginner's Hebrew class, will start up at about 1 o'clock after the oneg, after our lunchtime together. Our address is 134, right? 134 Forsyth Street. And that's Norfolk, Virginia, 23505. And you can go online if you'd like to send us an inquiry or give us a gift. There's a place at our website to support us. And the year's not over. This would be a great time to give to Beth Messiah, either at the services, at the kiosk, or our tithing box, or online at our website, okay? So God bless you, and we'll see you shortly.